everyone. Today I'm going to show how to palpate the extensor of the wrist and the flexor of the wrist. As we palpate the extensor of the wrist and flexor of the wrist, one thing we want to keep in mind, all of the flexor are found on the anterior forearm. When we are in a correct anatomical position, we say this is the non-hairy side of the forearm. The extensor are going to be found on the posterior forearm or the hairy side of the forearm. Another important tool that we can use to find the extensor or flexor is to have your client contract a muscle called brachioradialis. We sometimes call this the divider muscle. So, we support our client elbow, have them to make a fish, and push up into our hand, and you will see the muscle pop up here. It's run all the way down to the styloid process of the radius, that's called brachioradialis. If we are palpating lateral to brachioradialis, we are now on the extensor muscle group. If we are palpating the medial to the brachioradialis, we are then on the flexor muscle group. So, let's begin by palpating the extensor first. The extensor. So, the first extensor muscle we are going to palpate is really two muscles, but we are going to palpate it as one. It's extensor carpi radius longus and extensor carpi brevis. Longus is going to originate from the superulnar ridge on the lateral side of humerus. Extensor carpi radius brevis is going to originate from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. These two muscles are going to run down the forearm. They are going to cross the wrist. Longus is going to insert into the base of the second metacarpal, and brevis is going into the base of the third. So, to palpate these two muscles, you can take your client hand. We are going to start around the lateral humerus, and we are going to do our client AB and adduct. When they do this, it causes the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis to pop up. And you can feel the muscle to contracting. So, we're gonna find it and we're gonna follow it down the forearm. If you feel like losing the muscle or not sure on it, again, have your client to AB and adduct. As the adduct, we're gonna feel the muscle contract. We're gonna follow that muscle down. You can differentiate between longus. Longus going to the base of the second, and the brevis is going to the third metacarpal. Next muscle we are going to find is the extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum is an extensor muscle. Therefore, it's going to originate from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. The muscle come down the forearm, crossing the wrist, and it's going to insert into the middle and distal phalanges of digit 2, 3, 4, and 5. One thing you can have your client do to contract the muscle is to wiggle their finger. Wiggle the finger. And you can actually see the muscle contracts, which make it very easy to palpate. Also, if they extend the wrist and extend their digit, the tendon are going to pop up on dorsum of the hand, the tendon. Last extensor is going to be extensor carpi ulnaris. It originates from the lateral epicondyle at the humerus, and it then will go down to the forearm crossing the wrist, and it's going to insert on the base of the fifth metacarpal. This muscle is one that will adduct the wrist. We will actually see the muscle pop up. Okay, the extensor carpi ulnaris. Okay, now we are going to be palpating the flexor. So you wanted to make sure that you are palpating on the anterior side of the forearm. All of your flexor are going to originate around the medial epicondyle of the humerus. The first one we're going to palpate is to be flexor carpi radialis. It's going to originate the medial, go down to forearm, crossing the wrist to insert at base of the second, the base at the third metacarpal. The one thing about the flexor, I usually like to start palpating at the wrist because the tendon pop up. So if you have your client into flexion of the wrist, you can actually see the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis. It's gonna be the one close to the thumb. The one you can see in the middle is the palmaris longus. The one you see closer to the little finger, the fifth digit, or closer to the ulna is going to be flexor carpi ulnaris. So again, I'm going to have my client flex the wrist, and I'm going to find the tendon at flexor carpi radialis, and I'm going to follow it. To get the muscle to contract, we can have our client to do abduct and adduct the wrist. As they abduct, I can feel the contraction. I'm going to follow the muscle up to where it's originating at the medial epic. Next muscle is going to be palmaris longus. So again, if I have a client flex the wrist, the tendons that's pop up, that's more in the center, is going to be palmaris longus. We can also have our client to touch the thumb of the fifth digit and the first digit together. That's pop up the palmaris longus. Tendons pop up even more with wrist flexion. Palmaris longus originate at the medial epicondyles, round down to the forearm, crossing the wrist, and is going to insert the pulmoparsa. So I'm going to start here, finding the tendon and then going to follow it. I'm not sure about the muscle, so I can have my client to touch their first and fifth digit. Contract, I can follow it up to medial epicondyle. The last flexor is gonna to be flexor carpi ulnaris. Flexor carpi ulnaris again is gonna originate from the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It's gonna head down to the forearm, crossing the wrist to insert the pollius forearm and the base of the fifth metacarpal. When I have my client to flex the wrist, I'm going to feel a tendon. I can find picer. If I find a picer approximately, I feel that tendon pop up of flexor carpi ulnaris, and I'm going to follow it. If I'm not sure about it, the muscle, again, I can ask my client move addy and abduction, alternating between those two.